My parents didn't come to my graduation. They went to my ex's wedding. She invited them. I walked across that stage at Stanford Law to complete silence from the family section. 3 years of sleepless nights, $200,000 in loans, top 5% of my class, and the 2 seats I'd reserved were empty. My roommate's parents clapped for me. A stranger's grandmother gave me a thumbs up. I called my mom from the parking lot, still wearing my cap and gown. She didn't answer. My dad didn't answer. My sister finally picked up on the 4th ring and asked why I was calling during the reception. What reception? She went quiet, then whispered that she thought I knew. Knew what? She said mom and dad were at Vanessa's wedding in Napa. My ex-girlfriend Vanessa, the woman who dumped me 3 years ago for her CrossFit instructor. I drove home and opened Instagram. There they were in Vanessa's wedding photos. My mother in a lavender dress I'd never seen. My father in his good suit, the one he wore to my grandfather's funeral. They were smiling in the 3rd row. My father had his arm around my mother, both of them beaming at Vanessa walking down the aisle. The timestamp was 2 p.m. My graduation started at 2:30. They hadn't just missed my ceremony. They'd chosen not to attend. I scrolled through more photos and found one of my mother hugging Vanessa, both of them crying happy tears. The caption read, "Family isn't always blood. Thank you for always believing in me." My mother had commented with 3 heart emojis. I called my dad that night. He answered like nothing was wrong. I asked why they weren't at my graduation. He said they'd had a scheduling conflict. I told him I saw the photos from Vanessa's wedding. He went silent for 10 seconds, then said Vanessa had needed them there. Needed them. More than their own son needed them at the biggest achievement of his life. He said I didn't understand what Vanessa had been through, what she'd been through. I asked him to explain. He said Vanessa had told them everything. Everything about how I'd treated her during our relationship, how I'd been controlling, how I'd isolated her from friends, how I'd made her afraid to leave. I couldn't breathe. None of it was true. She'd left me for another man, and I'd spent 6 months in therapy just to function again. But it got worse. My mom sent me a text the next morning saying she needed time to process who I really was. She said Vanessa had shared things with her over the past year, things that made her question how she'd raised me. A year. Vanessa had been poisoning my parents against me for an entire year while I was buried in law school. Too exhausted to notice they'd stopped calling as often. I scrolled back through my texts with my mom. The conversations had gotten shorter. The responses had gotten colder. I'd blamed finals. I'd blamed the bar exam prep. I'd blamed everything except the woman who was systematically erasing me from my own family. My dad blocked me on Facebook that afternoon. I hired a private investigator. I know how that sounds, but I needed proof. 2 weeks later, he sent me a file. Vanessa had been telling my parents I'd given her an STD. She'd told them I'd drained her savings account. She'd told them I'd hit her once after a party, and she'd been too ashamed to report it. All lies. Every single accusation was fabricated. But the investigator found something else. Bank records showing Vanessa had borrowed $40,000 from my parents 8 months ago. A promissory note she'd never intended to honor. She'd been building a relationship with them to access their retirement savings. My parents had remortgaged their house for her, for the woman who'd cheated on me, and then spent 3 years destroying every relationship I had left. I flew home unannounced with the file. My parents wouldn't open the door at first. I slid the bank records under it. 5 minutes later, my mother opened it crying. She couldn't look at me. I showed them the investigator's report, the fake medical documents Vanessa had created, the social media posts where she'd laughed about the long game with her bridesmaids, the recording the PI had obtained of Vanessa telling her new husband she'd handled my family and the money was secured. My father sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. He'd missed his son's law school graduation to attend the wedding of a woman who'd stolen $40,000 from him. My mother tried to hug me. I stepped back. She asked what they could do to make it right. I told her nothing. Some things can't be undone. I'd walked across that stage alone. I'd celebrated alone. I'd proven that I could become something without a single person in my family watching. They chose Vanessa. Now they could live with that choice. My father started to speak, but I was already walking out. I didn't slam the door. I just closed it quietly and drove to the airport. Vanessa's new husband filed for annulment 3 months later. My parents sued her for the $40,000, but she'd already declared bankruptcy.